do that, what's the alternative? It's illegal immigration. And really, as long as we have illegal immigration, it's going to be a major touch point politically.
All right, so let's say that he actually turns the whole country into chaos by trying to deport 12 million people, as he's promised. What would the economic effect of that be? And I ask because I get business people coming to my office all the time from the hotel sector, from the construction sector, from seafood, from agriculture, saying there aren't enough people to do the work now. What would happen if we deported 12 million people?
Right. Look, it would be a blow to the economy similar to the Great Recession in size, $2 trillion blow to the GDP on an annual basis. You're talking about a massive blow to the budget. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that deficits will be lower by $1 trillion as a result of the immigrant workers that are working in the United States in these industries. And look, many American workers depend on the workers that we're talking about. In construction, you have 2 million Americans who are working in specialized positions and as managers and supervisors of illegal immigrant workers who are doing the tough manual labor jobs at the low end. So there's a complementarity between the U.S. workforce and the immigrant workforce.
Well, most violent criminals are not undocumented immigrants. Most undocumented immigrants are not violent criminals. What would it do to our efforts to actually fight real violent crime and gun-based crime in America, the AR-15s, the illegal trafficking guns, if we diverted federal, state, and local law enforcement just to deporting people who've not committed any crimes at all?
Look, we already don't solve 50% of murders in the United States, 75% of sexual assaults go unsolved. If you look at property crime, it's almost like we're not trying. We need to focus on serious crimes in this country. We have a crime problem. I completely agree with that. But diverting state and local police in particular away from getting justice for victims is a terrible idea for the country. Will not produce safety.
Yeah. And do you think it's a step on behalf of law and order to release en masse violent criminals who attacked the U.S. government to interrupt the joint session of Congress and the peaceful transfer of power in America?
I think people who commit violent crimes should have to serve their sentences and be punished accordingly.
And that was actually the position, I think, taken by our distinguished colleague, Mr. Jordan from Ohio, who repeatedly distinguished between violent and nonviolent offenders. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter in the record a CNN article in which Chairman Jordan was quoted as being hesitant about the sweeping pardons and saying that they basically should be focused on people who had committed nonviolent rather than violent offenses.
Without objection.
Finally, what should we be doing now to fix the immigration system?
Anyone could design a better legal immigration system than the one that we actually have. We need Congress to sit down and do their job and say, look, if we want people who come, who can support themselves, who can contribute to this country, there's a way to do it. It's not rocket science. You can write a law that says you have to come and be able to support yourself and contribute to the economy. We have bills that have done this in the past. We just need to pick them up and start that work again.
Thank you.
Chairman Jordan. Mr. Newman, did the Biden administration improve the immigration system and border security?
I think the stats show no. I mean, we've got a
That whole conversation just took place sounded like a bunch of nonsense to me.
Yeah, same.
Certainly 77 million Americans don't believe what they just heard from Mr. Raskin and the Democrat witness. Ms. Vaughn, did the Biden administration improve the immigration system and border security?
No, the Biden administration dismantled the controls, guardrails, limits, and turned programs into purposes for which they were never
Every
intended.
community on the border knows they did it. Yeah, we just had a 5-minute conversation. Oh, well, things are just wonderful. Joe Biden was the greatest. Mr. Fabricatore, you've been out on the front lines. You've dealt with this. Did the Biden administration improve the immigration system and border security?
No, we have more illegal alien criminals on the street today because of the Biden administration.
Yeah, they're trying to say, don't believe your lying eyes. Of course we know it's gotten worse. Earlier, Mr. Newman, you said the Biden administration invited the crisis. I think you're being nice when you use the word invite. I think they intentionally, deliberately, what's my opening say, willfully created the crisis. And I want to know, why would they do that? Why would an administration deliberately create the chaos we have seen? Upwards of 10 million people coming in the country. These it's interesting, these border communities, that's been the biggest change in voting Democrat to voting Republican has taken place in those communities because they've felt it firsthand. We were in Yuma, Mr. Biggs brought this up, we were in Yuma, Arizona. The cost of the education system, the healthcare system, the public services in those communities, unbelievable. So why would they intentionally? Why would they do this? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Why would an administration say we're going to deliberately create the chaos that 77 million Americans, I think all Americans know, has taken place over the last 4 years?
I can't pretend to know the motive of the administration, but what
I'm asking you to hazard a guess as an expert in this area.
looking at what they've done and looking at the policies, what's very clear is that there's been an intentional desire to get as many people into the country as possible and keep them.
Ms. Vaughn, can you take a run at that question? Why would they do it? I think all kinds of Americans ask that question. Why would our government do this to our nation?
Because they don't want any limits on immigration, and because no one could stop them.
Mr. Fabricatore.
There was a definite open border agenda at the last 4 years, and that is exactly the way that I see it.
But they hadn't completely. They knew exactly what happened. Most of this was videotaped so the whole world could see it. Well, Julian Cater repeatedly, violently assaulted our officer protecting us in Congress, Officer Brian Sicknick, who then proceeded to have several strokes and died on January the 7th, 2021, the next day. The family of Officer Sicknick is absolutely
the programs, immigration benefits, and immigration enforcement. Ms. Vaughn has a master's degree from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree from Washington College in Maryland. I want to welcome our witnesses, thank them for appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. Please know your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and we will begin with Mr. Fabricatore. Oh, could you turn on your microphone?
Good morning, Chairman McClintock and Congresswoman Lofgren and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the privilege of appearing before you today to discuss the urgent need to address dangerous sanctuary jurisdictions, improve interior immigration enforcement, and recommit to policies that protect American citizens. Over the past 4 years, the erosion of immigration enforcement has had devastating consequences for our communities. Sanctuary policies, the abuse of prosecutorial discretion, and overwhelmed court dockets have created a system that shields criminal aliens and jeopardizes public safety. I want to emphasize one key point today. Weak border and immigration enforcement policies have allowed unvetted and dangerous criminal illegal aliens to enter and thrive within our borders, leaving Americans at risk, such as the case involving a Venezuelan criminal alien who crossed illegally in El Paso, Texas, and was released into the U.S. in 2023. He was charged with raping a 14-year-old girl while he was living in his employer's basement in Colorado. He had been arrested previously for possessing tools for forgery and counterfeiting and larceny, but was released without notifying ICE. Sanctuary jurisdictions claim to protect immigrant communities, but they do the opposite. They shelter criminal aliens, accommodating and increasing crimes like drug trafficking, violent assaults, and human trafficking. One stark example is the Tren de Aragua gang. This violent group infiltrated Colorado, where their crime ranged from jewelry store robberies to deadly shootings. I witnessed the aftermath firsthand in Aurora, Colorado, where gang members terrorized an apartment complex. Residents lived in fear as armed criminals roamed freely, culminating in horrific violence and murder. Despite law enforcement efforts, these issues persist because sanctuary policies actively hinder the sharing of information and cooperation with ICE. Sanctuary officials ignore ICE detainers, release violent offenders back into communities, and undermine the public trust in the justice system. A mother and her teenage son were killed by an illegal alien and repeat DUI offender in Colorado last December. They are just one of the many tragic consequences of this leniency. ICE data underscores the crisis. Nearly 7.8 million illegal aliens are on the non-detained docket, freely roaming American communities, including 1.4 million with final orders of removal, and even 13,000 individuals convicted of murder. Not only that, the dismissal of 700,000 immigration cases and administrative failures in another 200,000 cases are examples of the prior administration's opposition to enforcing immigration laws. The spread of criminal networks is also alarming. Cartels like Sinaloa and Jalisco exploit sanctuary policies to flood our communities with fentanyl and other lethal drugs. Last year alone, law enforcement seized more than 115 million fentanyl pills. Yet availability remains unchanged, showing that these cartels continue to operate with impunity. We must return to enforcing immigration laws passed by Congress. This includes 1, holding criminals accountable by reinstating ICE detainers and ensuring dangerous individuals are detained and deported. 2, safeguard American families by dismantling the gangs and cartels that threaten our neighborhoods. 3, strengthen the rule of law by fostering cooperation between ICE and local law enforcement. Unfortunately, the Biden administration's policies eroded the effectiveness of interior enforcement. This leniency sent a dangerous message encouraging illegal crossings while undermining the tools ICE needs to apprehend and remove criminal aliens. The results are evident in the tragic rise of fentanyl deaths, human trafficking, and violent crime linked to foreign-born cartels and gangs. Reversing these policies is not just an option, it's a necessity. We must empower ICE, restore cooperation with state and local enforcement, and invest in the resources that prioritize U.S. citizens' safety and well-being. Members of Congress, our community's safety and our nation's stability depend on decisive action. Your top priority right now should be delivering the resources needed to assist the Trump administration in arresting, detaining, and removing illegal aliens. I urge you to preempt sanctuary policies and reinstate effective interior enforcement tools so that we can turn this vision into reality. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair is now pleased to recognize Mr. Grant Newman for 5 minutes.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and members of the subcommittee, Congresswoman Loughran. Thank you for holding this important hearing at a pivotal moment for immigration enforcement. Through action and inaction, the Biden administration invited the border crisis of the past 4 years, and the world was listening. During the first 4 years of the Trump administration, CBP encountered just over 3 million inadmissible aliens nationwide. By comparison to the Biden administration, CBP encountered nearly 11 million inadmissible aliens. In addition to implementing mass catch and release of illegal aliens with notices to appear and report, the Biden administration illegally initiated the systematic processing of inadmissible aliens into the United States with the guise of humanitarian parole and issued them all open market employment authorization. Under the CHNV program, more than 531,000 otherwise inadmissible aliens from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela received permission to fly over the border to American airports and disappear into the country's interior and from border enforcement statistics. It was ended Monday. Under the CBP-1 app, the administration encouraged illegal aliens to schedule their illegal entry at ports. Over 2 years, more than 936,000 aliens did just that. It can eliminate the job magnet for illegal immigrants. These solutions were passed by Congress last year in H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act. Congress needs to finish the job. Additionally, TPS should be reformed statutorily to prevent further abuse and endless extensions. Finally, Congress needs to provide sufficient resources, including ICRO officers and detention beds, to carry out carrier enforcement. Thank you, and I look forward to your question.
Thank you. We'll next hear from Mr. David Beer.
Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Loughran, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For nearly half a century, the Cato Institute has produced original research showing that a freer, more orderly, and more lawful immigration system benefits Americans. Unfortunately, from January 2017 to January 2021, the U.S. immigration system underwent an assault unlike any in modern history. President Trump abused his authority to cut legal immigration from abroad by nearly 80%, refugees by 92%. He shut down asylum even for legal crossers. He stopped enforcing the law. He removed requirements to target public safety threats in the interior. As a result, he released twice as many convicted criminals as President Biden. He forced U.S. attorneys to prioritize misdemeanor family separation prosecutions of parents over sex offenders. By the time President Biden took office, the U.S. immigration system was in shambles. Immigration courts, consulates, ports of entry, all shuttered. Even detention centers were at half capacity. Many Border Patrol agents were assigned away from the border. Human trafficking investigators were working on low-level visa overstay cases. In December 2020, Border Patrol arrests were at the highest level for any December back to 1999. Evasions of Border Patrol were 75% higher than when President Trump entered office. Border Patrol was told not to impose consequences on crossers beyond expelling them to Mexico under Title 42 of the Health Code. A decade of progress on deterring criminals from crossing reversed. Encounters with convicted.
In some cases, the rules themselves do not allow for meaningful controls. Some of these programs simply need to be shut down. Before I talk about that, I just want to endorse the comments made by my fellow panelists on the need to address sanctuaries, which are a major public safety threat and undermine the integrity of immigration laws. But I also want to mention that it's important to allow for a role for state and local officials in restoring integrity of our immigration programs and in enforcement. In some of the programs that I'm going to talk about, the states are really a gatekeeper to some of these programs, and so they have a stake in how they are run. And enforcement is not just a matter of imposing consequences on those who break the law. We need to be more prudent in administering visa and green card programs to reduce opportunities for abuse, either by unqualified applicants or by an administration that imposes limits on immigration. Visa overstaying is a chronic problem. More than 565,000 people overstayed their visa or visa waiver in 2023, and the State Department has done nothing but let this problem get worse in the last few years. Besides lenient entry programs, our immigration system offers too many opportunities for people to prolong their stay and obtain work permits, whether through long-term pretend temporary status or in programs that are a bridge to green cards and citizenship. And I'm referring to programs like TPS, OPT, Special Immigrant Juvenile Program, and the UNT visa programs for crime victims. All of these are loosely regulated and attract large numbers of fraudulent and frivolous applications. All of them have ballooned in size to historic numbers of applicants in the last 4 years. Collectively, these number at least 1.5 million and maybe as many as 2 million people, and that exceeds the size of all the other guest worker programs combined. For example, the OPT programs were never authorized by Congress, but allow hundreds of thousands of foreign students and foreign grads of U.S. schools or fake schools to get a work permit. The UNT visas for crime victims have proven.
It's about applying for a benefit in the United States for people who are already present in the country. So it's not, 212F does not override the asylum law that you all wrote, explicitly allowing people to enter regardless of how they entered the country.
And so the law is such that if you come in between the ports of entry, say surreptitiously, you're present in the U.S., 208A allows you to apply, correct?
That's right. It doesn't matter the manner or the status that you have can apply for asylum.
For one, I think Congress ought to revisit that, and I think it's very clear the system has not worked, and that we ought to have a different, asylum is important. There are some people who are seeking refuge. This asylum was adopted by all civilized countries after World War II, and there was an infamous case of Jews escaping Germany who were refused entry to the United States and by Canada. They were sent back to Germany, and most of them were killed in concentration camps. And most civilized countries adopted asylum rules subsequent to that war. That's important, but it's important also that it's for asylees, not people who are seeking, economic opportunity. I don't dislike or hate someone seeking economic opportunities, but they're not asylees. So Congress itself needs to address this issue, put some order so that we can have order at the border. And then if we have a need for people who are meeting economic needs in this country, there needs to be a more orderly way to deal with that as well. Let me just quickly ask you, if you can, there was an assertion that the amendment doesn't mean what it says. Can you address the 14th Amendment question for us, Mr. Beer?
Yeah, so the 14th Amendment says anyone born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is a U.S. citizen. And the subject to, what the executive order says is that all of these people who are children of guest workers or children of people without legal permanent resident status or citizenship are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which is flatly absurd. That would mean they weren't here illegally. That would mean they're not subject to U.S. law, like a diplomat who has diplomatic immunity. Obviously, they didn't think through the implications of making that kind of declaration. It's totally out of line with everything, all other constitutional interpretation.
Thank you, Mr. Beer, and my time has just about expired, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beer, what year was the 14th Amendment read? In this whole process of illegal immigration into America, I mean, we talk about the cartels and the horrible things that they do, but don't those NGOs also haven't they served as a vital link over the last 4 years of being able to bring people illegally into America?
Yes, sir, they have aided in helping illegal immigration enter into the United States.
Should we pull the money back from those organizations that have assisted in illegal immigration?
Yes, we should pull it back and use that money to help us with our deportation process.
If we're not able to pull that money back, should we have them help us reverse the flow and perhaps turn them into repatriation centers?
That sounds like would be the right thing to do, sir.
Mr. Chairman, the era of America Last is over, as you said in your opening remarks, and it's time to enforce the laws here in the United States of America. I yield back.
No argument from me on that point, Mr. Tiffany. The chair now recognizes Mr. Raskin for 5 minutes.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beer, just to be clear, you're with the Cato Institute, which my Republican colleagues generally love and are always quoting you and talking about you whenever we're talking about budget or fiscal affairs or so on. They don't like what you're saying about immigration today, and they certainly don't like your message, although I think they were completely stymied and flabbergasted when you said that things had improved marginally under President Biden, but had gone way south under Donald Trump. Explain why immigration policy was such a nightmare in the first Trump administration.
Well, we basically didn't have an immigration system by the end of the Trump administration. I mean, he basically banned all immigration from abroad, legal immigration from abroad, refugees down 92%, immigrant visas down 78%, non-immigrant visas down 80%. We basically didn't have an immigration system available to people at the end of the Trump administration. And if you look at what happened with convicted criminals crossing the border, the lack of focus on prioritization of convicted criminals in the interior, yes, the immigration system under the Trump administration led to a disaster. And ultimately, it took 4 years, but the Biden administration improved things significantly from the end of the Trump administration.
So the new Trump administration inherits a situation that's better in terms of unlawful crossings. What is going to be the effect of all of these executive orders at this point? It seems almost like they're calculated to produce more chaos.
Absolutely. He's trying to get rid of the legal channels by which people come into the country. He got rid of the refugee program day one. He got rid of the parole processes that allow people to enter legally on day one. He said, we're not going to do any kind of asylum, even for people who are entering the country legally. If you do that, what's the alternative? It's illegal immigration. And really, as long as we have illegal immigration, it's going to be a major touch point politically.
All right, so let's say that he actually turns the whole country into chaos by trying to deport 12 million people as he's promised. What would the economic effect of that be? And I ask because I get business people coming to my office all the time from the hotel sector, from the construction sector, from seafood, from agriculture, saying there aren't enough people to do the work now. What would happen if we deported 12 million people?
Right. It could be a blow to the economy similar to the Great Recession in size, $2 trillion blow to the GDP on an annual basis. You're talking about a massive blow to the budget. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that deficits will be lower by $1 trillion as a result of the immigrant workers that are working in the United States in these industries. And look, many American workers depend on the workers that we're talking about. In construction, you have 2 million Americans who are working in specialized positions and as managers and supervisors of illegal immigrant workers who are doing the tough manual labor jobs at the low end. So there's a complementarity between the U.S. workforce and the immigrant workforce.
Well, most violent criminals are not undocumented immigrants. Most undocumented immigrants are not violent criminals. What would it do to our efforts to actually fight real violent crime and gun-based crime in America, the AR-15s, the illegal trafficking guns, if we diverted federal, state, and local law enforcement just to deporting people who've not committed any crimes at all?
Look, we already don't solve 50% of murders in the United States. 75% of sexual assaults go unsolved. If you look at property crime, it's almost like we're not trying. We need to focus on serious crimes in this country. We have a crime problem. I completely agree with that. But diverting state and local police in particular away from getting justice for victims is a terrible idea for the country. Will not produce safety.
Yeah. And do you think it's a step on behalf of law and order to release en masse violent criminals who attacked the U.S. government to interrupt the joint session of Congress and the peaceful transfer of power in America?
I think people who commit violent crime should have to serve their sentences and be punished accordingly.
And that was actually the position, I think, taken by our distinguished colleague, Mr. Jordan from Ohio, who repeatedly distinguished between violent and nonviolent offenders. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter in the record a CNN article in which Chairman Jordan was quoted as being hesitant about the sweeping pardons and saying that they basically should be focused on people who had committed nonviolent rather than violent offenses.
Without objection.
Finally, what should we be doing now to fix the immigration system?
Anyone could design a better legal immigration system than the one that we actually have. We need Congress to sit down and do their job and say, look, if we want people who come, who can support themselves, who can contribute to this country, there's a way to do it. It's not rocket science. You can write a law that says you have to come and be able to support yourself and contribute to the economy. We have bills that have done this in the past. We just need to pick them up and start that work again.
Thank you. Yield back time.
Chairman Jordan.
Mr. Newman, did the Biden administration